I was 9 years old the morning my mother's car pulled out of my grandmother's gravel driveway and did not stop. I remember the dust. I remember my stepfather checking his mirror exactly once, not for me, for traffic. I remember thinking, standing there with one suitcase and a paper grocery bag of clothes, that this was the worst thing that would ever happen to me. I was wrong. Because while everyone was watching that car disappear down the mountain road, nobody was looking at my grandmother. Nobody noticed what she was holding in her hands that morning. A pair of old silver knitting needles and a recipe notebook with the cover half torn away. It took me 13 years to understand that those two objects were not what they appeared to be. They were a promise, and they were a door. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not about being left behind. It is about what was waiting for me on the other side of that door. Before I go on, if stories like this one mean something to you, subscribe and turn on notifications, and leave a like if this story touches something you recognize. And if you carry a story of your own, you can send it privately to vellumoflife@gmail.com. Your privacy will always be respected. Now, let me take you back to the house where I first learned how to disappear. We lived in Richmond, Virginia, in a rented townhouse with thin walls and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. For the first 7 years of my life, it was my mother and me. Her name was Corinne. She was beautiful in the restless way some people are beautiful, always looking past whatever was in front of her, towards something better that never quite arrived. I don't remember her being cruel in those years. I remember her being elsewhere. Even when she was in the room, some part of her was already at the next thing. I learned to read her moods the way other children learn to read weather. A door closed a certain way, a cigarette lit at the kitchen window, the particular silence that meant a man had stopped calling. When I asked about my father, I got the same answer every time, delivered in the same flat voice, like a fact she had memorized rather than lived. He was nobody, Delia, a drifter. He left before you could walk. Don't waste your thoughts on him. I was a child. Children believe the people who feed them, so I believed her. I built my father out of that one sentence, a shadow man walking down a highway somewhere, getting smaller and smaller. For years, that was all he was. Then came Wade, a farm equipment salesman with a belt buckle like a trophy, who filled our small townhouse the way weather fills a valley, suddenly, completely, and without asking. They married at the county courthouse when I was 8. I wore a dress that itched and stood slightly outside every photograph. And then Tyler was born. I want to be honest here, because this channel is built on honesty. I did not hate my brother. He was a baby. Babies are innocent of everything. But after Tyler arrived, I watched myself become subtraction. He was Wade's blood, Wade's name, Wade's blue eyes. I was the arithmetic left over from a man my mother refused to speak of, and every time Wade looked at me, I could see him doing the math. My school pictures came down off the refrigerator, and when relatives visited, I was introduced last, with a small pause first. And this is Delia, the way you mention a detail you'd rather skip. I turned 9 that spring, and I know exactly what my 9th birthday looked like, because it looked like nothing. Tyler had a fever that week, a baby fever, the ordinary kind, and the house organized itself around it, the way our house organized itself around everything that was his. I came home from school, and there was no cake, there was no card. There was a casserole dish in the sink, and my mother on the phone with the pediatrician, and Wade watching a game with the sound up. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a while, waiting to be seen. Then I did something I still think about. I went to my room, took a sheet of notebook paper, and made myself a birthday card. I folded it in half, wrote "Happy Birthday, Delia" on the front in my best cursive, and drew a small cake with 9 candles. I put it on my pillow so I would find it at bedtime, as if it had arrived while I was out. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to make that little girl sound pitiful, and she wasn't. She was practical. She had identified a shortage in the household, and she had covered it herself, quietly, the way she covered everything. I didn't know it yet, but I was already my grandmother's granddaughter. I just hadn't met her. A few weeks later, I came downstairs for a glass of water and stopped on the landing because I heard my name in the kitchen. Wade's voice, low and reasonable, the voice he used for closing sales.
"I'm just saying, Corinne, his mother's alone out there in Holland's Gap. Old woman like that could use the company. And honestly, it'd be one less mouth, one less complication."
There was a pause. I stood on that landing and I prayed, the specific, bargaining prayer of a 9-year-old, that my mother would say no. What she said was, "Let me think about it." I meant back upstairs. I never got the glass of water. 3 weeks later, my mother packed my clothes into one suitcase and a paper grocery bag and told me we were going to visit my grandmother in the mountains. I remember asking why I needed all my clothes for a visit. She turned up the radio. Holland's Gap, Virginia, sits in a fold of the Blue Ridge, where the fog comes down the mountain in the morning like something being poured. My grandmother's house stood at the end of a gravel road, small, white, honest, a porch with 2 chairs, a garden laid out in rows so straight they looked drawn with a ruler, a wood stove chimney with a ribbon of smoke even in summer. I had met Harriet exactly twice in my life. She was my father's mother, which, in the mythology my mother had built, made her the mother of nobody, a woman we did not visit, a name that closed conversations. She was standing on the porch when we pulled in, as if she had been told the exact minute, as if she had been standing there for years. My mother did not turn off the engine. She got out, set my suitcase and the grocery bag on the bottom step, and said something quiet to Harriet that I couldn't hear. Harriet said nothing at all. Then my mother put her hand on my shoulder for 2 seconds, I counted, and said, "Be good, Delia. This is better for everybody." And she got back in the car. I have replayed that gravel driveway 1,000 times. The dust, Wade's eyes flicking to the mirror, the brake lights that never came on. Here is what I did not see that morning, because I was 9 and my whole world was driving away. I did not see my grandmother's face. Neighbors told me years later that Harriet Renner stood on that porch like a woman watching a debt being delivered to her door. Not a burden, a debt someone finally had to pay. And I did not see her hands. In her left hand, a pair of silver knitting needles, old ones, the kind they don't make anymore, worn bright at the tips. In her right hand, held against her apron, a notebook. A recipe notebook, thick with loose pages, its cardboard cover torn diagonally across, as if it had survived something. She had brought them out to the porch that morning, on purpose, both of them. I wouldn't understand why for 13 years. The first thing my grandmother ever said to me as the sound of the car faded down the mountain was not, "I'm sorry." It was not, "Poor child." She picked up my suitcase herself, 72 years old, and she picked it up before I could, and she said,
"Supper's at 6. You can cry until 5:30.
I thought it was coldness. It was the opposite. It was the first time in my life an adult had looked at my pain, taken it seriously, and given it a place to exist, without letting it become the whole house. I cried until 5:30, almost exactly. Then I washed my face, because something in her voice made you want to meet it, and I came to the table. There was cornbread, there were beans with ham hock, there was a glass of milk from the neighbor's cow, and there was my grandmother, sitting across from me, eating in a silence that was somehow the least lonely silence I had ever been inside. The first months in Holland's Gap were an education in a language I didn't know existed. In Richmond, love had been a mood, something that came and went depending on the weather inside my mother. In my grandmother's house, love was a schedule. The stove was lit at 5:30. Eggs were gathered at 7. The garden was weeded before the heat and watered after it. My clothes, the grocery bag clothes, disappeared one by one and returned mended, taken in, re-hemmed, until they fit me the way clothes fit children whose measurements someone actually knows. She never once said the word love that first year. She said things like, "Wear the other coat, that one's thin," and "Eat the rest of that, you're growing," and "I put a lamp by your bed, you read too late to be reading in the dark." It took me years to understand that those sentences were all the same sentence. Sundays, we walked to the white clapboard church at the crossroads, where the women of Holland's Gap studied me with kind, unhurried mountain curiosity, and where my grandmother introduced me, every time, to every person, with the same 4 words, delivered like a legal statement she was entering into the record.
"This is my granddaughter."
No pause before my name. No explanation after it. You would have had to have been introduced with a pause your whole life to know what those 4 words, without one, can do to the architecture of a child. At night, she knitted by the stove, and the sound of the silver needles, that small, patient ticking sound, became the sound I fell asleep to. To this day, it is the sound my body files under the word safe. That first night, though, lying in a narrow bed under a quilt that smelled of cedar and lavender, I saw it for the first time. On top of the tall wardrobe in the corner of my room, a wooden box, cedar like the quilt, small brass latch, positioned exactly where a child could see it and never, ever reach it. I asked her about it once, that first winter. She was knitting by the stove. Her needles didn't even slow down.
"That box is not mine, so it's not mine to open."
I was 9. I thought it was just a strange answer. It was the truest sentence anyone had ever said to me. Poverty in Holland's Gap was not dramatic. It was arithmetic, done nightly, in pencil. My grandmother had her late husband's small pension, a garden, 3 laying hens, and hands that could turn wool into money. That was the entire economy of our lives. And yet, I want to be precise about something. I never once felt poor in that house. I felt accounted for. Every potato had a plan. Every jar on the shelf had a purpose. There is a kind of wealth in being managed with that much care, and I have met millionaires since who never had it. School was harder. I was the new girl with the grocery bag wardrobe. The girl whose own mother, and small towns learn everything, had dropped her off like a parcel. Children are honest about cruelty in a way adults aren't. A boy named Curtis said it to my face in the lunch line.
My mama says even your mama didn't want you.
I came home that day and told my grandmother what Curtis had said, expecting, I don't know what I expected. Fury, maybe? A phone call to the school? What I got was better, and it took me 20 years to fully appreciate it. She sat me down at the kitchen table, poured 2 glasses of buttermilk like we were colleagues, and said,
Is he wrong?
I stared at her. What?
About the fact. Your mother drove away. That happened. You can't argue with a fact, Delia. You'll lose every time. What you can argue with is what a fact means. That boy thinks being left is something you are. I know for certain it's something that was done to you. Those are different sentences. Learn the difference now, and no one will ever be able to say that to you again. They'll say it, but it won't land. Words only land where there's an open wound to land in, so we're going to close the wound. That's all. It takes a while, and we've got a while.
Then she cut me a slice of stat cake, and we never discussed Curtis again. She was right. He said it twice more that year. By the 3rd time, it landed on closed skin, and even he could tell, and he stopped, because cruelty is a business, and children abandon businesses that stop paying. Meanwhile, contact from Richmond thinned the way daylight thins in November. My mother called 4 times the first year, twice the second. The calls were short and stood in line behind Tyler's nap schedule. The 3rd year, the calls became a Christmas card. The 4th year, the Christmas card became nothing. And I remember checking the mailbox through most of that December. And I remember the exact day I stopped checking, because it was the day I understood that grief has a bottom, and you can stand on it, and it holds. But I still carried one question like a stone in my coat pocket, all the way from Richmond. That spring at the kitchen table, I finally asked it, the real one. Did my father not want me either? My grandmother was rolling out biscuit dough. Her hands stopped. I had never seen her hands stop. For a moment, she looked at the flour on the board, like it was a letter she was reading. Then she said, in a voice I'd never heard her use,
There are questions I am not free to answer yet. Not because the answers are bad, because they are not mine to give.
Then whose are they? She looked at me, 73 years old, gray eyes, and something behind them straining against a rope.
Yours. When it's time, they're yours.
And that was all. For 9 more years, that was all. But a house full of silence is also a house full of clues if you live in it long enough. Clue number 1 was the notebook. The torn recipe notebook lived on the kitchen shelf, and by 12, I was cooking from it. Biscuits, apple stack cake, Brunswick stew. Its pages were in my grandmother's neat, upright hand, except the margins. In the margins, there was a second handwriting, smaller, slanted, younger. Little notes in pencil beside her recipes. Needs more cinnamon. Mama, this one. Every Sunday. A crooked drawing of a chicken beside her dumpling recipe, with the caption, General Cluck. Whenever I asked whose handwriting it was, my grandmother would answer a different question, or discover something urgent in the garden. Clue number 2 came on the first Tuesday of every month. An envelope, no return address, postmarked Burlington, Vermont. I saw it once before she took it from the mailbox herself, which she did every single month, without fail, walking down that gravel drive in rain or ice, like an appointment. She never opened them at the table. She took each one to her room. And here is the part that made no sense to me for years. We needed money. I knew our arithmetic. I did the pencil math beside her some nights. Those envelopes, whatever they held, were never in the math. Once, I was 14, and we needed a water heater. I asked her straight out why she never opened them. She was quiet for a long moment.
Because if I spend what's in them, I've sold something that isn't for sale.
What?
You are right to hear it all at once, from the beginning, with the proof in your hands.
I didn't understand. She knew I didn't understand.
We don't beg, Delia, and we don't sell. We build.
Clue number 3, of course, was the cedar box, which stayed on the wardrobe, which was not hers to open. I stopped asking, not because I stopped wondering, because I had begun to trust her the way you trust load-bearing walls. Whatever she was doing with those silences, she was doing it for me. I could feel the shape of it, the way you feel a room in the dark. So I did the only thing there was to do in that house. I built. My grandmother put the silver needles in my hands the first winter, when I was 9, and said knitting was arithmetic you could wear. By 11, I could turn a heel. By 13, I could read a cable chart the way other kids read comic books. By 15, women at church were quietly asking Harriet whether the girl took commissions. The girl took commissions. We set up a table at the Hollands Gap Farmers Market, her preserves, my knitting. I learned to price wool and labor. I learned that a hand-knit christening blanket, done right, was not a craft, it was an heirloom, and people pay for permanence. I kept my money in a coffee tin, labeled in my grandmother's hand, Delia, forward, not savings, forward. I need to tell you about the winter I was 16, because it is the winter that proves everything else in this story. That January, 2 things broke in the same week, the well pump and my grandmother's wrist. She slipped on the porch ice, reaching for the wood basket. A clean fracture, the doctor said, lucky at her age. But a knitter with a casted wrist is a factory with the power cut, and the pump was $400 we did not have, and her pension check was 11 days away. I sat at the kitchen table that night doing our pencil arithmetic, and I couldn't make it work. I did it 3 times. It didn't work 3 times. And on the shelf in her bedroom, I knew, sat that month's envelope from Burlington, Vermont, unopened, like all the others. I was 16 and cold and scared, and I said the cruelest thing I ever said to my grandmother. I said, "Your pride is going to freeze us both." She looked at me for a long moment across the lamplight. She didn't raise her voice. She never once raised her voice in 9 years.
Child, you think that envelope is money. It isn't. It's testimony. The day I spend it, it stops being proof of what someone did for you and becomes payment for what I did for you. And then when the time comes, you'll have every right to wonder if I kept you for love or kept you for the checks. I will haul water from the creek before I let you wonder that.
Then she picked up the phone, called the church, and by Saturday, 4 men from the congregation had fixed the pump for the cost of parts and a standing invitation to Sunday dinner, because that, she informed me, was not begging. That was community, which is a bank too, one she'd been paying into for 50 years. We hauled water for 6 days. We were fine. I knitted her commissions myself that winter, with her sitting beside me, casted wrist in her lap, talking me through the tension, like a pilot talking a passenger onto a runway. Every piece was delivered on time. I have negotiated with museum boards and national foundations since. Nothing in a conference room has ever impressed me, because I have watched a woman refuse $400 at 80 years old on principle in an unheated kitchen and win. School turned, too, the way things turn when you stop waiting to be chosen. A home economics teacher, Mrs. Fontaine, saw a lace shawl I'd made from a pattern I'd redrafted myself, and instead of saying, "How nice," she said the sentence that changed my trajectory.
Delia, do you know that museums pay people to understand textiles?
I did not know. I found out. There was a field called textile conservation, people who restore quilts, tapestries, christening gowns, the fabric evidence of human lives, people whose entire profession was refusing to let precious things be thrown away. You can imagine what that idea meant to a girl who had been left on a porch. I worked. I mean the unphotogenic kind of work. Homework by the wood stove, commissions until my fingers cramped, a 4-H scholarship application, then a Pell Grant application, then a university application. Every form filled out in pencil first, checked twice, because in our house, paperwork was sacred. Paperwork was how people with no lawyers protected themselves. The acceptance letter came from the University of Virginia in the spring. I turned 18. Partial scholarship, work study. The coffee tin would cover the gap for exactly 1 year, and 1 year was a door, and a door was all we had ever needed. My grandmother read the letter twice at the kitchen table. She did not cry. She got up, made coffee, and said,
Then you go.
And then she did something she had never done in 9 years. She looked up at the top of the wardrobe. You could see it from the kitchen doorway. And she said in a voice that had been waiting so long, it came out almost soft.
But not before Saturday. On Saturday, you turn 18. And on Saturday, there is something in this house that becomes yours.
On the morning of my 18th birthday, my grandmother climbed onto the kitchen chair before I was fully awake. I heard it and came running, because she was 81. And she brought the cedar box down from the wardrobe with both hands, the way you carry something living.
She set it on the kitchen table, put the silver needles down beside it, and the torn recipe notebook beside them, so that all 3 objects were finally in one place. Then she sat across from me, folded her hands, and said,
Before you open it, I'm going to keep a promise and break a silence. I need you to let me do it in order.
This is what she told me, at that table, while the fog came down the mountain outside. My father's name was Nathaniel Renner, her son. And the reason I grew up believing he was a drifter who vanished is that a document said he had to be. When I was 2 years old, my parents' separation went before a lawyer. My father was 23, broke, working timber jobs. My mother had a settled home, a plan, and an attorney paid for by her own family. And she had a condition, written into the custody settlement. My grandmother slid the document out of the box, an actual legal agreement, yellowed, stapled, signed, and she put her finger on Clause 7C.
I read it myself. I've read it 100 times since. In exchange for a lump sum payment, my father borrowed against 3 years of wages. My mother took sole custody, and my father agreed to no contact of any kind, direct or indirect, until the child reaches the age of majority.
He was young, and he was poor, and he was told by everyone that a girl needed her mother, and that fighting would only drag me through the mud. So he signed, and he regretted it, my grandmother said, before the ink was dry.
He signed away his voice. He never signed away his word.
Then she opened the box. Letters, 63 of them, The oldest were addressed to me at the Richmond townhouse in that small, slanted handwriting, and every one of those early envelopes was stamped "Return to sender," refused, in my mother's era, in my mother's hand, not at this address, written over an address where I absolutely was. Then, from the year I turned 9, the year I arrived on the porch, the envelopes changed. They came addressed to me, care of Harriet Renner, Holland's Gap, unopened, every single one, because the clause said no contact, direct or indirect, and my grandmother, who had taken me in, was not going to give my mother's lawyers a single sheet of paper to take me away with.
That box was never mine. It was always yours. It just wasn't yours yet.
Underneath the letters, the money orders, 108 of them uncashed, one for every first Tuesday from Burlington, Vermont. He had sent money above and beyond that settlement for 9 years, knowing it might never be touched, because sending it was the only sentence he was allowed to say. And underneath the money orders, at the very bottom of the box, one last thing: pages, torn pages with a torn diagonal edge, the missing cover and the missing half of the recipe notebook. The small slanted handwriting in the margins of our kitchen, the one that wrote "Mama, this one, every Sunday," it was his. He had grown up in that kitchen, a boy making pencil notes beside his mother's recipes. When he left home, he had torn the notebook down the middle and taken half, so that mother and son each kept the same book, unfinished without the other. I had been cooking from my father's childhood all along. I read the letters in order. It took me 2 days, and I am going to share small pieces of 3 of them, because he has given me his blessing to do it, and because you have earned it by staying this long. From the first letter, written when I was 2, returned unopened, refused stamped across his handwriting.
You won't read this for 16 years, if you ever read it at all. I signed a paper yesterday that I will regret for the rest of my life, and I signed it because everyone I trust tells me it's what's best for you, and I am too poor and too young to know if they're wrong. So I'm going to do the only thing the paper doesn't forbid. I'm going to write to you anyway, and keep writing, so that if you ever come looking, you'll find a stack of evidence instead of a stack of excuses.
From the year I turned 9, the first envelope addressed to Holland's Gap.
Mama tells me nothing because the paper says she has to tell me nothing, and my mother has never broken a rule in her life. But the envelopes stopped coming back. Do you understand what I'm saying? The envelopes stopped coming back. You're home.
And from the last letter in the box, written 3 weeks before my 18th birthday.
I have no right to a single minute of your time, and I want you to know I am not asking for one. I am only finishing what I started.
63 letters. Not one of them asked me for anything. My grandmother kept the coffee coming and asked no questions, and I understood, finally, what she had been holding in her hands on that porch 9 years earlier. His needles that she taught me with, his notebook that she fed me from. She had been giving him to me the whole time, 1 legal inch at a time, without ever breaking a single line of Clause 7C. No shouting, just paper. When I finished the last letter, dated 3 weeks earlier, still asking nothing, still expecting nothing, I did not get in a car. I did not make a dramatic phone call. I did what the women of my house do. I took out a pen, and I wrote 1 letter, and I asked 1 question. The dumpling recipe. Did you ever find out what happened to General Cluck? His answer arrived 9 days later. 3 pages. The first page was laughing, and the last page was not. My father sat at our kitchen table for the first time that June, a tall, quiet man with workman's hands who owned a timber frame restoration company in Vermont now.
a man who fixed old, precious structures other people had given up on. And if you think he and I didn't stare at each other when we each learned what the other did for a living, you have not been paying attention to how blood works. He and his mother did not hug for a long time. They stood in the kitchen, looking at each other. Then he saw the two halves of the notebook, side by side on the table where I had placed them, edges matched. And Nathaniel Renner, 50 years old, sat down in his childhood chair and wept into his hands. And my grandmother put down her needles and finished, at last, the longest row she had ever knitted. I graduated in textile conservation. I apprenticed in Williamsburg. Today, I run a small conservation studio in Charlottesville, where families bring me quilts, christening gowns, wedding lace, the fabric that proves they were loved. The first object ever restored in my studio, before it had clients, before it had a sign, was a recipe notebook, both halves, rebound as one book. It sits in a case on my workbench, and it is not for sale, and it never will be, because some things in this world exist to teach you the difference between price and worth. My father and I built what we could in the years we were given, and it was more than either of us hoped. He taught me joinery. I taught him cables. We cooked the Sunday recipe. We did not waste our time being angry, because anger is also a form of contact with the people who hurt you, and we had both had enough clauses in our lives. My grandmother lived to see the studio open. She sat in the front room in her slate blue cardigan, watched me hang my license on the wall, paperwork sacred as ever, and said the longest compliment she ever gave me.
Good.
She left us the following spring, in her sleep, under the cedar quilt. Her will was 1 page. I have it framed. It reads, in part, "To my granddaughter, Delia, I leave my needles, my notebook, and my name, all 3 of which she has already been carrying for years." And my mother? My mother resurfaced 2 autumns ago, after a magazine ran a feature on the studio, on the heirloom revival and the woman behind it. Her letter was warm in the way weather is warm, and it arrived, I noticed, only after the word successful had appeared next to my name in print. I thought for a week about what to send back. In the end, I sent no accusations, no speech. I am my grandmother's granddaughter. I sent a single photocopy, Clause 7C, and on a small card, in my own hand, which is upright like Harriet's, I wrote 1 line. "I was raised to answer letters. This is the only one of yours that was ever addressed to me." There has been no reply. There is no anger in that sentence. There is only arithmetic, done in pencil, at a kitchen table, by women who keep accounts honestly. People sometimes ask me what the moment was, the moment everything turned. They expect me to say the day the box came down. It wasn't. It was a morning when I was 9 years old, standing in gravel dust, watching a car leave. Everyone in that story was looking at what was driving away. The whole time, the answer was standing on the porch.
Holding a pair of silver needles she intended to teach me with, and half of a torn book she intended to feed me from, guarding 63 letters she refused to open, and 108 envelopes she refused to cash, holding in 2 hands the entire proof that I had been loved without interruption for every single day of my life.
They left me at her door. They just never asked what she was holding. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to become part of the Vellum of Life community. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.
I share new stories of quiet strength, dignity, and second chances every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I would truly love to have you here for the next one. If you've lived a story like this, if someone kept a promise for you, or if you became the person who kept one, leave a like and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you carry a story that deserves to be told, you can send it privately to vellumoflife@gmail.com. Your privacy will always be respected. Names, cities, and every identifying detail will be changed. Every story deserves dignity. Thank you for staying with me until the end, until the next chapter.